interest of this town in football. This place is going crazy.
Into the end zone. Touchdown! We here. You can't go nowhere now.
The NFL, also known as the National Football League, has attracted and entertained billions of fans for over 100 years, me being one of them. This professional sports league consists of 32 teams divided between 8 different divisions within the American Football Conference and the National Football Conference. Now, while the main event is the game being played on the field, there is also plenty of entertainment on and around the field, such as cheerleaders and the topic of this video, the mascots. And today I'm talking about the mascot of my favorite team, the Cincinnati Bengals' beloved Louie. This larger-than-life feline has been a Bengals icon for over 30 years. However, many may not realize there were Bengals mascots before him. So in this video, I'm going to go over all the Cincinnati Bengals mascots over the years, from the highs to the lows, from the past to the present. This is the history of Louie, the Cincinnati Bengals mascot. So before we talk about this cool cat, we must talk about his team that he cheers for, the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals were founded in 1967 as part of the American Football League prior to their merger with the NFL, and played their first game in 1968. The team was founded and coached by Paul Brown, who also founded and coached another NFL team in Ohio, the Cleveland Browns. He wanted to start another team in Ohio after being let go from Cleveland in 1961, and chose Cincinnati because the Reds baseball team was trying to get a new stadium. And so the city thought it could hold a football team too. As for the Bengals nickname, it was chosen because Paul Brown wanted to pay homage to a former football team in Cincinnati, also called the Bengals, that played from 1937 to 1942. The world-renowned Cincinnati Zoo also housed a rare white Bengal tiger at the time of the team's creation. So with the city and team name chosen, the Bengals were finally ready to play their first home game at Nippert Stadium, and that's where our mascot story begins.
When you match a Bengal tiger against a Miami dolphin, you'd think a fish dinner would be the end result. But when the hunt was over, the Bengals had an empty paw.
Beginning around 1968, right before their first game, the Bengals decided to introduce a mascot. Now, this wouldn't be anything too special if it were to happen today, but back then it kinda was. You see, unlike colleges and universities, professional sports teams didn't really feature mascots. I mean, some teams did, but most chose not to. And speaking of college, some teams that adopted mascots used live animals. For example, the Saints used a dog, and the Dolphins used a dolphin. And the Bengals also decided to do this as well. Say hello to Benzu, the very first mascot for the Cincinnati Bengals. He is of course a Bengal tiger, but more specifically he is a young cub. Now you're probably wondering, how in the world did they get a real life tiger to be the mascot? As well as why is his name Benzu? Well, to answer those, the Ben part of his name obviously comes from the Bengals, and the Zoo part of his name comes from the fact that he was born at the Cincinnati Zoo. Again, they were very famous for their tigers, and that's how the team was able to get one. And before you ask, yes, they did bring him to the games. Now, when he was brought to the games, he really only stayed in a small cage, because you couldn't have live tigers running around. That's kinda dangerous, even if it was a cub. Sometimes the handlers would take him out of the cage to hold him, but this didn't really happen too often. As he got a little bit bigger, he grew out of the cage, and instead he had a leash, so at least he got to be on the field, probably because he wanted to attack the opposing players who kept pestering him. As the years went on, the Bengals really started to grow from an expansion team to a permanent addition of the league. They moved out of Nippert Stadium into their own playing field, Riverfront Stadium, and they invited Benzu to come along. Now Benzu grew as well, quite literally, as he was now no longer a small little cub, but a full-grown Bengal tiger. So big, in fact, that he couldn't be on a leash anymore, and he had to stay in a large circus wagon decorated with Bengals colors and logos. And the craziest part about this was at the beginning of games, Benzu was brought out in his wagon, and it was pulled by a group of sled dogs. I'm not kidding. They actually did this. But Benzu didn't seem to mind this. After the 1974 season, the Bengals decided that Benzu was a little too old and dangerous to handle at the games, and so they decided to find a new Benzu that was a cub. And so they did, beginning in 1975, and over the next 15 years, more Cincinnati Zoo tiger cubs served as Benzu. They even used white tigers for a while in the 80s. And that's really all I can say about Benzu, as there isn't too much info on him. But now to continue Benzu's journey, we have to move on to the next mascot. But this one probably won't kill you.
Unlock the door to wild adventures Wednesdays at the zoo. Wednesday is Keeper's Key Day, and it's extra special because Keepers will talk with you on taking care of animals, from aardvarks to zebras. And when you make a Wednesday visit to the zoo, we'll give you a special Keeper Key card. Use your Keeper's card on 2 more Wednesdays and your next visit's free. Don't miss it. Keeper's Key Day every Wednesday at the zoo. Wild adventures wait for you at the Cincinnati Zoo.
So in the last section we talked about Benzu, the live tiger mascot. But in terms of a normal mascot costume, then we have to go back a little bit to 1972. This photo from 1972 appears to be the first known sighting of a Bengals mascot costume. And if you're wondering who that is, it's Pittsburgh Steelers player Terry Bradshaw. Sadly, I wasn't able to find any photos or videos of this costume at any Bengals games. However, the Bengals have said that a costumed mascot has been used since 1972, so until I get some more information, I'm considering this the first official costumed mascot. Of course, a tradition of this channel is I go over the costume piece by piece, but for this costume I don't really see anything too special, other than the fabric looking pretty realistic, and the head being extremely terrifying. Kinda reminds me of the Penn State Nittany Lion for a little bit. If only this picture was in color, then I'd probably have more to say. But that's really all I have on this costume. It seems to have only been used in 1972, since in 1973 that's when the next proper Bengals mascot was used. This next costume, I will say, is kind of a downgrade compared to the last version. It also looks very cheaply made, and that's why I'm referring to this one as Rags the Tiger. So Rags was created because I guess the Bengals wanted a mascot that could actually interact with people on and off the field, as opposed to one that chills in a cage roaring and scaring little kids. But then again, this guy may have actually been scarier. As for the costume itself, like I said earlier, it's very cheaply designed. The fur color is a very light orange, but it often appears yellow in some videos. It did simplify the stripes a little bit, which is good. The head is probably the creepiest part of this costume. While it may seem like a normal mascot head at first, the mouth area is very derpy. And those eyes. Oh, those eyes. The same eyes I see on a lot of vintage stuffed animals at flea markets. He's also for some reason wearing shoes, and what's probably the weirdest part about this costume is the fact that he has a belly button. Was this necessary? Why did they do this? I'm no zoologist, but I'm pretty sure real tigers don't have a belly button. At least the costume gives the performer inside a lot of free movement. He even got to interact with Benzu a few times, and occasionally got to run out with his team, which he still does to this day. More on that later. At the end of the day, this costume isn't good, but it's kinda got a little charm to it, just because of how vintage it is, and I've kinda grown attached to him. But Rags was used from 1973 until 1979, when the Bengals decided to replace him with a mascot that wouldn't scare as much people, though I think they failed with what they came up with.
When there's a lot on the line, one store has the power to cut your costs. Kroger.
Any variety Tony's Italian pastry pizza, 15.3 to 17.5 ounce size, $1.59. New Maine margarine, 1 pound quarters, 39 cents. Cons regular or thick sliced bacon, $2.19 for a 1 pound package.
Catch the cost cutter savings. Go Krogering.
Beginning in 1980, a new tiger mascot costume began roaming the sidelines with Benzu, replacing Rags altogether. Now there were actually quite a few mascots used around this time, and while I was able to find videos and a few photos of Rags, there's barely any information on the next few costumes, as I could only find a few clips and no photos. Thankfully the costumes aren't anything too special, but anyway, here's the first one. So if you couldn't tell, this Bengals costume is realistic looking, and kind of an improvement over the previous one, but in my opinion it looks even scarier, and very generic. It looks like one of those cheap mascots you see at a high school football and basketball game. All my hate really only goes towards the head, as that's where all the problems are. The mouth area is very wrong. It's tan with a red nose. What is this guy, Rudolph or something? Also, the mouth looks pretty bad, with it being an open mouth with sharp teeth. And just like the costume from 1972, it has a realistic design when it comes to the stripes, looking more like an actual tiger. At least just like Rags, this costume looks easy to move in. Overall, not much to say on this costume either. I know I've said that a lot, but there really isn't anything too noteworthy. But some of these costumes that come after, they'll have a little bit more info. I will say that while I don't like this costume too much, I have to give it some respect since it led the Bengals to have a massive success in the 80s, where they made the playoffs, championships, and 2 Super Bowls. And speaking of the Super Bowl, let me tell you about another 80s Bengals mascot who only appeared at one very infamous game. So if you grew up as a Bengals fan in the early 80s, you probably know about this game. And even if you're not a Bengals fan but still an NFL fan, then you still may know about this game. I'm of course talking about the 1981 AFC Championship, aka the Freezer Bowl, that took place on January 10th, 1982. This game has gone down in NFL history as the coldest game ever played, with a temperature of -9 degrees, but with added wind chill it was a whopping -59 degrees. So yeah, it was cold. So cold, in fact, that some people actually died due to exposure. But that didn't stop the Bengals from putting on a heck of a show against the San Diego Chargers. And along with Benzu and the costumed mascot, there was another mascot on the field, but this one was hard to miss. Say hello to the Bengals secondary mascot, Big Ben, not to be confused with the Steelers. He was a 15-foot tiger that only appeared at this game. Unlike the others, we actually know who created this costume. It was designed by Cincinnati-based costume company Stagecraft Inc. That name should sound familiar as they were the ones who designed Louisville's mascot suits around the same time. In fact, the CEO and president of Stagecraft, Randy Kent, was the one inside the costume. He also had 2 helpers who moved the arms when the Bengals scored. Here's a weird fun fact I learned. Because of how cold it was at the game, when Randy took off the costume, his sweat on the aluminum supports actually turned to ice. That's how cold it was. The only problem I have with this costume is the face, as it doesn't look anything like a tiger. It honestly looks more like a Rockafire Explosion character, mostly because of the eyes and mouth. I will say that I like him a lot more than the other costumed Bengal. By the end of the game, it seemed that Big Ben made a difference, as the Bengals went on to win that game and made it to the Super Bowl. The Bengals even wanted Stagecraft to bring Ben over to the Super Bowl. However, it never happened. You see, the 1982 Super Bowl, also known as Super Bowl 16, was played in Pontiac, Michigan, at the world-famous Pontiac Silverdome. And at the Silverdome, they had seats that came all the way down to the field, and if they had brought the 15-foot Big Ben, then he would have blocked the vision of the fans. I will say that despite not being able to go to the Super Bowl and ultimately being retired after the Freezer Bowl, Big Ben actually did make the cover of Sports Illustrated. However, I wasn't able to find a picture of the cover for this video. And if you're wondering how the Bengals did in the Super Bowl, well, they lost to the 49ers by 5 points. Let's talk about one last Bengals mascot from the 80s, but this one wasn't just used by the Bengals. So in 1983, to capitalize on the popularity of Care Bears and Cabbage Patch Kids, the NFL created this line of merchandise called Huddles, and every team had one. They were technically considered official team mascots and appeared on several collectibles like stickers, small toys, and most famously stuffed animals. The Bengals one probably looked the best in my opinion. It just looked so cute and cuddly like a small little kitty cat, or perhaps a friendlier version of Garfield. Though I'm not sure if he was yellow or orange as it varied throughout merchandise. Along with all the merchandise, every team was given a physical mascot costume used at the games. However, while some Huddles costumes are well documented, the same cannot be said for the Bengals, as I could barely find any information on this costume. The only photo I could find is a screenshot from a recent NFL mascot promotional video from 2015. But it seems to be the same as the rest, and looks really on model with the Huddles design. I was able to find a few videos on it, but I didn't include them here since he could only be seen from a distance, and you could barely tell it was him. What I do know is that the Huddles mascot began to be used around 1984, and lasted all the way up until 1991. However, it seems he was temporarily retired in the late 80s, as despite looking through old Bengals games on the sidelines, I could not see him anywhere. They also began putting a bigger focus on Benzu, who was still being used at the time. They even had 2 Benzu cubs, which brings up the real question. Which one's the real Benzu? Speaking of Benzu, in 1989 the Bengals once again made it to the Super Bowl. However, Benzu 1 and 2 were not allowed to attend for liability reasons, despite the Bengals trying. And because of that, as well as breeding problems, the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cincinnati Zoo officially decided to end the Benzu program. The end of Benzu drew so much controversy amongst Cincinnati fans, who began to boycott and protest the NFL for banning the Cubs. But the NFL stuck by its policy and wouldn't budge. The Bengals did, however, still promise that they would have a mascot for the following season. And so this officially concludes the Benzu era of Bengals mascots. Now we move on to the 90s, where we will talk about the costumed replacements.
You a Bengals fan? Tell the world with Bengals checking, only from Fifth Third Bank.
Beginning in the 1990 season, Benzu was gone, but Huddles was still around, as I'm guessing he was a temporary replacement until the Bengals could find a new mascot suit to use, because he was eventually retired after the 1991-1992 season, and a new mascot suit was used. But this one is very, very forgotten, and I wouldn't have known about it if it weren't for this clip. So in this clip from a 1992 game against the Colts, there appears to be a Bengals mascot, that of a white tiger, perhaps as a callback to Benzu. We don't really get a good look at him, but we can see enough. Personally, I don't really like this costume. The head's kinda scary, and it's too oversized on the performer. The body also looks a little tight and hard to move in. Now, it's unclear how long this suit was used for, but it was definitely used for a very, very short amount of time. It was probably hated so much they may have only used it for that one game. Especially since I couldn't find it in any videos from 1992 other than that one. It could have also just been a placeholder for the next costume while it was being designed. And speaking of that costume, let's talk about it. Beginning around the early to mid-90s, the NFL really started to take mascots seriously, as more and more teams began introducing one. The Bengals were no exception. At the start of their 1993-1994 season, the Bengals introduced their new and now iconic mascot, Houday. And for anyone wondering why the Bengals mascot is named Houday, let me explain. So the phrase Houday is actually part of a cheer that us Bengals fans yell at games. The full chant goes like this: Houday! Houday! Houday think gonna beat them Bengals. It's been used for over 30 years, and the Bengals decided it would be the perfect name for their new mascot. Before I talk about the costume features, I want to mention the company who made it since we actually know. This costume was designed by the company KCL Productions, and if you recognize that name, then you're probably familiar with their work for Nintendo, most notably their Super Smash Bros. 64 commercial. As for their Bengals costume, it's overall pretty good. It does look a little scary, but not too bad. He really does look like a real tiger, but still retains a small bit of a cartoony appearance. His body isn't anything too special, but for the first time in Bengals mascot history, not counting Big Ben, he's wearing a jersey with the Cincinnati Bengals text on the front and Houday on the back, as well as these black shorts, and in this photo he's wearing white shoes, but he also does have normal tiger feet to wear. Despite how awesome this mascot looks, it apparently didn't bring enough luck to the Bengals, as throughout the entirety of the 90s, the Bengals became one of the worst performing teams in the entire NFL, even to the point of being called the laughingstock of the league. But at least Houday was there to support his team throughout the hard times, although in 1995, Houday temporarily took some time off, as another Bengals mascot was introduced. Sort of. Around 1994, the NFL decided to start a new program similar to what they did with the Huddles characters in 1983. But this time they were referred to as the Team NFL Heroes. Each team had a character created and used on different types of merchandise, like t-shirts, school supplies, and stuffed toys. They also had a mascot costume created for each team, and they debuted at the 1995 Pro Bowl. Some of these mascots later went on to become the official team mascots, like the Denver Broncos and the Dallas Cowboys. While most of these characters have been well documented, the same cannot be said for the Bengals, as their Team NFL hero is largely forgotten. But we do know what it was. Here's a Team NFL Heroes school supplies kit containing what I think is erasers of the teams in the AFC North, and the Bengals just so happens to be one of them. Now this is the only photo I could find of the Bengals Heroes character, whose name is Sarge, and it's not the best quality. But luckily for you guys, I'm an artist, and so I tried to draw what I think the design looked like. Alright, so here it is. And you may notice the lack of stripes. That's because the original design seemed to lack stripes on the head, but there are some on the tail. Sarge appears to be wearing a Bengals jersey and helmet just like what the other team mascots wear. Sarge's face was the hard part, as I couldn't really make it out, so I just kinda guessed what it looked like based on the shapes. If anyone watching this has this eraser card thing with the Bengals Sarge character, please let me know in the comments as I want to see how close my drawing is to the actual design. As for a costumed Sarge, there is absolutely no evidence to show that one existed. It was known that every team had one, so a picture could show up at any point, But until then, and all we have is my drawing that may or may not be accurate. Although while editing this video, I did find this doll from 1995 with a Bengals mascot design that looks suspiciously similar to the Sarge design. With the NFL getting into the mascot business, Houday got to do more things than any other Bengals mascot, though it's actually unknown if the other Bengals mascots did events outside of sports. For example, Houday got to go to several NFL Pro Bowls and hang out with other team mascots, and was regularly seen around Cincinnati. Now I know I haven't talked about the logo too much, as it really wasn't anything too special, but I should mention in 1997, the Bengals debuted this new logo, that's often been considered one of the best sports logos of all time. But now I wonder, is this logo inspired by the mascot suit? Because the more that I look at the two, the more I see some similarities, although maybe it's just a coincidence. As we entered the new millennium, aka the 2000s, the Bengals decided to change. They got a new head coach, new all-star players, and they decided to abandon Riverfront Stadium, now known as Synergy Field, to play at their new home, Paul Brown Stadium. The Bengals also started to finally recover from their disappointing losses in the 90s. They were winning more and more games, but they still had a while to go. However, just like what happened to Synergy Field, the Bengals mascot designs just kept crashing down, in terms of quality control. So around this time, this is where the term taxidermy era really starts to show its namesake, because while the previous one also fits into this chapter, it's actually done right, but these next few are taxidermy gone horribly wrong. In 2000, a new version of Houday debuted at the games, and let me just say, this one's really bad, but it's not horrible. It was designed by the Canadian company Street Characters Inc., who is the company responsible for about 90% of the mascots in the NFL and NHL. And while I enjoy most of their costumes, this Bengals one is a big dislike. Talking about the costume itself, the main problem is the head, as it falls into the uncanny valley in terms of looking realistic. The head is also a different color compared to the rest of the costume, and the eyes are too small and creepy. The ears are also too small as they tend to bend forward. At least the body is decent, with it being a more appropriate orange color than the head is. He's wearing the same shirt as the previous version, and I just now noticed this, but there's this weird patch on the left side. However, I can't make out what it says. He's no longer wearing shorts, but is now wearing white pants, the same white pants that the players wear. There's also a tiger stripe design on the side. Finally, instead of normal tiger feet, he's wearing these black shoes with a white line on the side. And that's all really. Not much information exists on the specific costume, other than there's this weird bobblehead of the costume, and the fact that it only lasted from 2000 to 2005, when the next and final costume in the taxidermy era was introduced. Beginning in the 2005 season, Houday was once again redesigned. Now I want you to imagine what the past costume looked like, and imagine the head, but it was built and designed by someone who glanced at it and built the new head from memory. That's what I would call this next Houday. This is garbage. It's so bad. I'm not sure how it got approved. I guess Mike Brown didn't give a on what the mascot looked like, or he was too cheap to get an actually good costume, because this is so bad, it doesn't have any charm. Did I mention that this costume was also designed by KCL Productions, who made the actually good costume from before? Okay, I need to calm down. I'm getting salty, but this costume makes my blood boil. Let's go over it and see why it's bad. So just like the last suit, the part of the costume that triggers me the most is the head. It's so bad because they kept trying to make it look like he's smiling, despite the fact that real tigers don't smile for the most part. And so to have this design smiling just makes it look creepy. This is Uncanny Valley times 50. Also, just like the last version, it has a discolored nose area, but it does improve the last design with it having the right orange color for the rest of the head. However, he also has what looks to be even smaller eyes. You can barely tell they're there, it just looks like two black holes. His ears are also too small for his head, and once again they bend forward. The body actually looks okay, but it's basically the same as the last version. But he has a different shirt. This one says Cincinnati Bengals, but also includes the new at the time B logo, and the top left patch now says National City. It also says it on the back with Huday's name on it, and the number 1. His shoes appear to be the same, but now instead of only wearing white pants, he has a few different pairs, like shorts. And on one instance, nothing. Have fun, furries. I guess I should also mention that this costume had a few variants, such as a Santa suit without pants, this one where he's wearing a shirt that says Live United, and when he appeared at the 2009 Pro Bowl, he was wearing a Speedo while laying on a towel with other mascots. This version of Huday actually appeared at many Pro Bowls in the 2000s, but little did this cat know that his time would soon be up come next season.
Much now to a story that I'm really excited to share with you guys. He's one of the most beloved figures in the entire Bengals organization, but rarely do you get to hear from him. I'm talking about the mascot, Huday. Recently, I got him to open up about a variety of different things. Take a look at this interview.
After the 2008-2009 season, all seemed normal with Huday and the Bengals. There were no signs of change, besides getting new players like every other team. But the Bengals had a surprise for everyone at their 2009-2010 season opener. If you couldn't guess what the surprise was, then I'll tell you. Huday received a major redesign, and this one's actually good. No longer is Huday a walking taxidermy, but now a walking cartoon character straight out of Disney, and I couldn't be happier. Although the sad thing is the costume maker is unknown, but I'm 100% sure it's street characters because it looks so similar to their other works with the NFL. So now that I let out all my anger on the last costume, I can now say more positive things about this costume. Starting with the head, wow, this is an outstanding improvement over the previous one, as the Bengals finally decided to stop making their mascot suits realistic, and go full cartoony on the design. He now features a much friendlier smile with only 2 fangs and a large tongue. He still has a lot of white around his head, but now his nose is larger and instead of pink, it's black. He also now features hair on the top of his head and white around his large yellow pupilled eyes. He kind of has a great balance between looking kid-friendly and slightly intimidating for opposing fans. As for his body, it finally changed, as it seems Huday has been hitting the gym. I mean, look at these muscles, my god! He's more built than some NFL players, let alone mascots, even though it's just foam details. And for some reason he has 5-fingered gloves instead of 4, like a proper tiger. But I guess it's to hold things better, like a football. He once again went back to sporting black shorts, and also no longer is he wearing shoes, but now he has his large white-toed tiger feet. Although at first he wore the shoes, which looks pretty weird. Also, I know I haven't talked about the tail on most of these costumes, but this one I can finally do that because not only does his tail have a white tip at the end, but it also appears to be bendable, as it's often seen in different poses depending on the event. Is it actually bendable? I'm not sure. This version of Huday was very well received, as many thought the last version was too scary and creepy, but this one quickly won over people's hearts, even if the Bengals did lose their first game with the new design. At least he got to lead his team to a few playoffs. This Huday actually has the most amount of photos and videos of him, which makes sense as he's the most recent mascot design. But in general, he's done more things than any past Bengals mascot. For example, Huday started attending even more events around Cincinnati and Ohio, like at Cincinnati Reds games, different local outdoor festivals, and he even came to Kentucky, or more specifically Northern Kentucky University, where he attended mascot basketball games. Of course, he also showed up at a few NFL Pro Bowls beginning around 2011, where he's been seen dancing and playing with the other NFL mascots. Sadly, he hasn't been in a Pro Bowl since 2017, but maybe that'll change this year. Speaking of change, I should mention that while Houday was still used as the mascot, another Bengals-like character was used in 2013. So in that year, the NFL partnered with Nickelodeon to produce a cartoon series based around the NFL, called NFL Rush Zone. Now, I've never watched this show since it was barely on TV, but I do know that they had these weird alien creature things that represented every single NFL team. Basically a modern version of the Huddles concept from the 80s. The Bengals version of this, whose name is Fang, was weird because it has features of a tiger, but it's in this weird alien-looking design. It's really creepy and really unsettling. But he does have an old-school football helmet, which is cool. Sadly, this show didn't last too long, but it did get some merchandise in the form of pillows, and even a line of McDonald's Happy Meal toys. Speaking of merchandise, one important thing to a mascot and brand is merchandise. And oh boy did the Bengals make Houday a merchandise machine. As there's so much merchandise, it's hard to show it off in this one video. Yes, I know the other Houdays had merchandise too, but not as much as this guy. He's got hats, bobbleheads, statues, and this little Lego type figure. I really want this. Houday also became the spokes-tiger of a few companies that advertised in the Cincinnati area, and has appeared in many commercials and promotional videos. For example, he appeared in a AAA commercial telling people to be a member and save money, as well as appearing in several Tri-Health and Heart Association videos, sometimes with other Cincinnati mascots to explain how to save lives, by learning CPR and getting a mammogram. Now this video wouldn't be complete until I talk about the world-famous mascot versus youth football games. You see, during every NFL season, several teams have a halftime show where they get a local youth football team made up of kids and have them go against mascots, typically mascots from the same area or city as the football stadium. The Bengals are one of these teams that participates in this tradition, and it's pretty amazing to watch, especially since the mascots seem to always take the game too seriously, since they're constantly pushing over these kids. It's hilarious. I think it's time I talk about costume variants for this Houday. He doesn't have too much, but he's got a few. First, he has this Santa suit around Christmas, which looks pretty identical to the previous one, except this time he's actually wearing pants. And for Veterans Day, he wears this military army outfit. This one isn't really a variant, as he's just wearing two Cat in the Hat hats, but it's cool, so that's why it's here. The last one here is strange, as he's wearing what appears to be a red Pro Bowl jersey. It's kind of weird seeing him in this, since the other mascots aren't wearing those jerseys. While we're on the subject of variants, I might as well mention that there appears to be two Houday costumes used, as I've noticed some differences between the two. I mean, look at this one's head. Okay, now look at this one's head. Doesn't there seem to be a difference? I don't know, maybe it's just me. Also, as of recently, Houday has traded in his black shorts in favor of wearing tight football pants like the players. Now this I don't understand. I mean, the costume was clearly designed for shorts. If you don't believe me, then look at his legs. It almost looks like he's cutting circulation to his body due to how tight his pants are. Just stick with the shorts. One last thing. So in my Louie the Cardinal video, I talked about a few of the performers who performed as Louie, and I was kind of hoping to do that with Houday. However, Houday's current performer is unknown, and this doesn't just apply to him, but all the different costumed Bengals mascots. No one has come out to say that they were the Bengals mascot. Perhaps it's because of a non-disclosure agreement, maybe it's because the older performers are no longer with us, or maybe it's because the Bengals are seen as the laughingstock of the NFL to many non-fans, and saying you performed as the mascot may result in cyberbullying. Whatever the reason is, Houday's performer is still a mystery to everyone outside the team as of September 2021. Hopefully one day we will finally figure out who is Houday. And that brings us to today. As of September 2021, the cartoon Houday is still being used by the Bengals. And with a bunch of new all-star players coming in this decade, I see a bright future for Houday and the Cincinnati Bengals. And there you have it, the history of Houday and other Cincinnati Bengals mascots. Before I end, I just want to apologize for a few things, like possibly getting a few things wrong and getting confused. Like I said at the beginning, this was the hardest history video I've researched so far. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment down below which mascot was your favorite. Is it Houday, Benzu, Rags, or anyone else? Please let me know, as I'd like to know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next month on the History of series. Bye-bye.
Will the Bengals win the Super Bowl? Oh, that is a heck yeah. That's not just a yes. That is a heck yeah.
Jace, bruh. 513, baby. Stand up. Let's get it. I'm about to get some chicken wings and watch the Bengals play. I'm about to get a couple drinks and watch the Bengals game. My city like a zoo, we just watch the Bengals play. And I don't know about you, I'm about to watch the Bengals game. Houday, go Houday, go Houday, Houday. Tell them who you rooting for. Houday, go Houday, go Houday, Houday. Tell them who you rooting for. Riding down Vine real slow with my windows down. This a Midwest thing, this that Queen City sound. Better study up, young boy, cause we been around. Self-diploma over everything, yeah, we run the town. I'm Cincinnati to the death of me, definitely. Is you rapping? Is you rapping? Definitely, definitely. I'll be stunning, I'll be running, I'll be coming for the trophy. If you don't know me, you don't know me, so don't act like we homies. They like, who that? They already know the team. Who that? It's YB23. And I ain't gotta say it, cause you know what I mean. Orange and black, everything, and I ain't talking Halloween. Sheesh. I'm about to get some chicken wings and watch the Bengals play. I'm about to get a couple drinks and watch the Bengals game. My city like a zoo, we just watch the Bengals play. And I don't know about you, I'm about to watch the Bengals game. Houday, go Houday, go Houday, Houday. Tell them who you rooting for. Houday, go Houday, go Houday, Houday. Tell them who you rooting for. I hold it down for my city. I got a couple Bengals with me and all of them are pretty. I got my brother E-Train here with me. I be like, go DJ, go DJ, go DJ, go and get it. This that anthem, yeah, this is that anthem. You got a problem, well, this is that answer. So stand up on every campus. I got my hands up, I'm handsome. They should put me on that camera. I be clowning, I be hosting, so you don't wanna get roasted. Me and my homies be toasting, about to put some plays in motion. Yeah, the Bengals is my squad, but you already know this. If I had a band, I'd call it Houday and the Blowfish. I'm about to get some chicken wings and watch the Bengals play. I'm about to get a couple drinks and watch the Bengals game. My city like a zoo, we just watch the Bengals play. And I don't know about you, I'm about to watch the Bengals game. Houday, go Houday, go Houday, Houday. Tell them who you rooting for. Houday, go Houday, go Houday, Houday. Tell them who you rooting for. I hold it down for my city. It's that YB23. It's that YB23.
You know what, Theo? I think the Bengals have a really good chance at making the playoffs this year. In fact, I think we have a chance at the Super Bowl even. I promise that we're going to make a Super Bowl sometime this decade. Just like how I made a promise to one of my old friends. Oh, I miss him so much. Hopefully we'll get to reunite one day.